Action and Reaction by Chitra Fernando. In my family, everyone regarded my father's elder sister as a very good and generous woman. I thought so too. In those days, I had a great respect for the opinion of my elders. Father said, "Now try to be like Lokunanda, Mahinda. She is an example to us all." Mother said, "Lokunanda has the more Shraddha than all of us. Lokunanda never killed anything, not even a mosquito. And once I saw her saving some ants that has fallen into a basin of water. Even the most insignificant creature benefited from the Lokunanda's attentions. Lokunanda never stole. She had a large house and garden, a lot of jewelry, and a small coconut property in Matara. She had everything she wanted. She never lied. She often said she never did. And of course that we all believed her. Lokunanda's conduct was always irreproachable. She was a broad woman, a bit on the short side and very dark. Her nose and lips were thick, her skin coarse. She had a large mole on the tip of her nose and another with a hair in it on her chin. At the back of her head was a very small conde. Unless they were her relations, the Lokunanda kept all men at a safe distance. And they kept Lokunanda at an equally safe distance. She had never married, as for drinking or smoking. Even the thought of her doing either of these things made me want to laugh. Once the Punchinanda caught Siripale and me sharing a cigarette in the back garden, and the first thing she said was, "How disappointed Lokunanda will be, Mahinda. You are only 15, but you are already doing all these bad things." Then she told father about it. Father said, "I will not have smoking. I will not have drinking in this house." And then he told Lokunanda about it. Lokunanda looked at me in silence. She said, "Mahinda, there is no need for me to tell you anything. Why should I say everything? Your own karma will deal with you. Smoke as much as you like. When you get lung cancer, you will know all about it. This gratification of the senses brings the only disease, death and samsara. Don't say I didn't warn you." Punchinanda, who was listening, nodded vigorously and said, "I hope you have taken all this in, Mahinda. No need to look the other way. We are advising you for your own good." I often wish that they were less concerned with my own good, but I could say nothing. So I continued to look the other way. Punchinanda was also unmarried and so had no household of her own. But though she was always singing Lokunanda praises, she had a strange preference for living in our house. At the time of the cigarette smoking incident, she was always talking about yet another instance of Lokunanda's generosity and compassion. Lokunanda's good deeds were uncountable so everyone was quite certain that at the very least she could be sure of a place in the Tusita heaven. But this instance of Lokunanda's generosity was not an almsgiving. It was not a special puja. It was not donating a loudspeaker to the temple for the relay of the daily banner preaching so that all the Payagala townsfolk could not but benefit from the loudness of Lokunanda's piety. This was a meritorious deed, which was the much better. Lokunanda was going to adopt a little girl from Mathura, not of course as a daughter. No one expected even Lokunanda to go to such lengths. It was unthinkable that a toddy tapper's child could be Lokunanda's daughter, and therefore our relative. Lokunanda had took much consideration, too much common sense for that. She was the practical woman. Kusuma was to come to her house as a servant. Nangi and I were at Lokunanda's house the morning she arrived. Kusuma, her father said, was 12, but she looked about 9. She was small and skinny, and her huge dark eyes half filled her little face. Lice crawled in her curly black hair. There was a sore on her knee. In the village, she had lived in a hut, one of 8 children, half starved, beaten, and bullied. In Lokunanda's spacious house, there was the comfort of a good food, clothes, and a suitable wage deposited in a post office savings account. As mother said, what more could any sane servant expect? It was, we all felt, the perfect sum total of a servant's happiness. Father said, that girl must have done a lot of merit in her past lives. Just imagine, after living like an animal in that hut, to come to a house like Akka's. Must be like the heaven to her, was the mother's contribution. She is not bad looking, and with all the good food she will be eating, she will soon fill out. I hope she is not going to be greedy and steal. That must be firmly stopped right from the start. Punchilanda did her best to see that everyone observed the second precept. Don't worry, Akka knows how to deal with stealing. She gives her servants so much. For them to misbehave is just raw wickedness, nothing else. As she always says rightly, no one can escape the karmic law, Father said firmly. A week later, Lokunanda came to our house with Kusuma. Already, we noticed an improvement in her appearance. Her hair was clean and lice-free. When she had arrived, she had been wearing a badly sewn, shabby frock. Now she wore a close-fitting white cotton blouse and a pretty flowered red and white cloth. Everyone complimented Lokunanda on her good work. She looked very satisfied. I know how to treat my servants. That is why they never leave my house. Sulky, has been with me for 15 years now. This was the perfectly true. Lokunanda did treat her servants well. They enjoyed a fair bit of comfort in her house. The full effect of Lokunanda's generosity to Kusuma appeared in about 3 months' time. In that time, she seemed to have grown taller, fairer, and certainly very much fuller. Lokunanda often said there was nothing wrong with her appetite. She eats as much as Salpi, and doesn't she love sweets? Punchinanda said, "Now don't spoil her. I hope she won't steal. Have you caught her at it ever?" "No, she is a bit greedy, but I give her plenty to eat, so she really has no need to steal." "If she steals, will you beat her, Lokunanda?" asked the Nangi with interest. "No, Mala, I don't beat anyone. You know that. I'll know what to do. I always follow the karmic law. It's my constant guide." I was sometimes puzzled by Lokunanda's way of talking about the karmic law. Of course, we all knew about karma. I remembered very well what the monks in the temple used to say. Everybody had to take the consequences of his actions in the one way or another. If you wanted too many things, that your desires would make you linger in samsara. You would be a prisoner of your desires. That is what the monk said, but I wasn't sure that I understood. Because the Lokunanda, who was so wise, seemed to want a lot in return for whatever she did. But in those days, I didn't bother too much about such things. I had so many more important things to think about, like how to dodge Pali classes, or ways and means of smoking without being caught and lectured to. Lokunanda was pleased with Kusuma. She was intelligent and learned quickly. She soon learned to be neat and clean. She was very helpful in the house. She dusted the furniture, all Lokunanda's carved ebony chairs and couches in the sitting room. She cleaned all the brass trays, lamps, and vases. She was very good at fetching and carrying. Lokunanda wondered whether she should teach the Kusuma to read and write. She thought about it a bit. Then she told us that to teach Kusuma how to crochet would be far more useful. Lace table mats were in great demand and fetched a very good price. Lokunanda was a very practical woman. After Kusuma's arrival, Nangi began to visit Lokunanda almost every day. Kusuma knew very little, so Nangi began to feel very wise, though she knew very little herself. I was, of course, the really wise one among the younger lot. In those days, we all thought ourselves the very wise, but everyone acknowledged Lokunanda to be the wisest. This was her own opinion as well, naturally. It seemed to me that Nangi liked showing off a bit. She would sit with Kusuma on the veranda steps and tell her all about the wonders of the world. Had Kusuma ever been to Colombo? No, then she wouldn't ever been in a lift, would she? No. Had she ever been on an escalator? No. Kusuma's the ignorance was so satisfying to Nangi. Had she ever been to the zoo? No. What was a zoo? Nangi was in her element. She told Kusuma all about the zoo. The tigers, the lions, the bears, the giraffes, the kangaroos, the zebras, the red-black baboons, the elephants. Kusuma had seen an elephant. Oh, Nangi was quite disappointed. Where had Kusuma seen an elephant? Dragging logs on the road. That wasn't so bad. The zoo elephants didn't do anything as silly and foolish as the dragging logs. They balanced on the little stools or skipped round the arena. And then all the people laughed and clapped. Kusuma longed to go to Colombo to see all those marvels. She asked the Nangi 1,001 questions. Nangi brought her picture books. Kusuma had never held a book in her hands before. She turned over the pages carefully. Nangi lent her the books for a few days. She couldn't read, of course, but she loved looking at the pictures. Then Lokunanda ordered Nangi to take the books away. Kusuma looked at the pictures too often. That very afternoon, she was looking at the pictures when she should have been polishing the brass. Of course, Lokunanda didn't mind Nangi talking to Kusuma, but she must not spoil her. So Nangi took the books away, but Kusuma talked and talked about the animals at the zoo. The cat is like the tiger, said Kusuma. It is a little tiger. And she cuddled the household cat. Yes, I said. The cat is the kind of a tiger. And I told her all about the cats and tigers and leopards. She listened to me with her great black eyes wide open. She had a great longing for information, for knowledge in those days. The new year drew closer. We were going to spend the new year in Colombo with the Punchiamma and all our cousins. Nangi asked, "Can we take the Kusuma too?" Mother looked surprised. It was such a new idea. She didn't know what to say. She has never been to Colombo. She has never been in a lift. She has never been on an escalator. And she has never seen a lion or a tiger or a giraffe or a zebra or a kangaroo or Nangi had to stop for breath. Lokunanda, began Mother. I'll ask her, said Nangi. I decided Nangi was a lot the wiser than I had thought her. We went to Lokunanda's the next day. Nangi carried a dish in her hand. What is that? I asked. Nothing, said Nangi. Nothing? Let me see. I lifted the cover of the dish and saw the Waraka inside. I laughed. I understood all. There is nothing to laugh about, Nangi said a bit huffily. Ah, Mala, what is that? Lokunanda eyed the dish with great interest. We had a lot of Waraka at home, and I said you liked Waraka, so Amma sent it. Lokunanda smiled. She loved getting presents. Nangi said tomorrow she would bring her some mangosteens. Tomorrow the Banda would come from the Kalutara, and he always brought mangosteens at this time of the year. As we were leaving, Nangi said, "We are going to Colombo for the New Year. Can the Kusuma come too? Please, please, Lokunanda, please, let her come. I always feel so dull at Punchi Amma's. Everyone's bigger than me and they don't play with me. Please, Lokunanda." Nangi's pleading, almost the tearful face, the Waraka of today, the mangosteens of tomorrow. How could Lokunanda refuse? She did not refuse, so it was settled. Kusuma would go to Colombo with us. Nangi raced to the back of the house. Kusuma was sweeping the garden. "You are coming with us to Colombo. You are coming with us." Nangi jumped up and down. She was mad with joy. Kusuma stood where was quite still. "You are coming to Colombo, to Colombo." Kusuma stared. Then all at once she understood. She smiled. A little dimple appeared for a moment. I had never seen that dimple before. I never saw it again. Her teeth were very small, like little gleaming grains of polished rice. And all the stars in the sky tumbled right into her great black eyes. We were to go to Colombo the following week. The day before we left, Nangi and I went over to Lokunanda's with the 2 bottles of honey that she had wanted. We were to leave for Colombo by the Ruhunukumari the next morning. As we stepped onto the veranda, we could hear Lokunanda's angry voice from inside. "Aren't you thoroughly ashamed, girl? You eat a mountain of rice every day. Yet you steal. Greedy, disgusting, filthy girl. Chi, chi." Salpi said something, but we couldn't hear her very clearly. Thoroughly curious now, we went into the pantry where all the noise was. The moment Lokunanda saw us, she said angrily, "Kusuma is not going to Colombo. She is not going. Don't I give her enough to eat? Do you know what she's been doing? Quietly eating my cow." They were here in this airtight tin. I caught her stealing caught her red-handed. It was true. Kusuma was clutching a cow in her hand. She stared at the floor. Half the cows that have been eaten. She's been stuffing herself these last 2-3 days. The greedy thing, Mala, you have been spoiling her with all this talk of Colombo. All these the lions and zebras. She is getting quite disobedient. No Colombo for her, no new cloth and jacket. I give and give and give, and this is my reward. This the creature steals my cow. Now what shall I do? You can make some more, Lokunanda, said Nangi timidly. Look, we have brought you some really fine honey. She held out the bottles eagerly. Lokunanda ignored the bottles. Makes some more. Oh, it's easy for you to talk. Will you make them for me? The fine young lady hopes to go to Colombo, and I'm to sweat over a fire, making more cones to replace those she has gobbled up. Oh no, the calm with the law is my constant guide. No Colombo, no zebras, and kangaroos for this creature here. She'll stay behind and help to make the more counts. Kusuma didn't look up, didn't utter a word. The comb held tight in her clenched fist crumbled and the bits fell on the floor. Nangi and I left quietly. A few minutes later, we could still hear Lokunanda shouting at Kusuma. Tears of disappointment were streaming down Nangi's cheeks, yet Kusuma hadn't shed even a single tear. We saw her in the garden the next morning as we walked past the Lokunanda's house to the railway station. Nangi tried to speak to her, but she ran inside. Mother said, "Now, Mala, leave her alone. You will only make the Lokunanda angrier. It was very wrong of her to steal. She has to be punished." Lokunanda's always talking about giving, but she is not going to give the Kusuma even a New Year present. And Kusuma isn't going to get any cow or cookies or alwa. Lokunanda is very unkind. Enough, Mala, enough. You talked far too much. Kusuma has stolen. She has to be punished. I agree completely with Lokunanda, said father severely. Nangi pouted. She was glum all the way to Colombo. But when she arrived at Punchiamma's, we found that our cousin Leela had come down from the candy, and then the Nangi forgot all about Kusuma. After the incident, Lokunanda kept Kusuma very busy. She was always cleaning, polishing, sweeping, or crocheting. There was little time for play. In the months that followed, I too began to be increasingly busy. At the end of the year, I sat for the first public examination and passed with 2 distinctions and several credits. After that, I went to live with Punchi Amma in Colombo and went to school there. I was in the Payagale only for the holidays. The world, I realized, was a very big place, and the world of ideas was even bigger. I passed my university entrance examination and went to live in Kandy. I read a lot. I held forth to my friends, argued with my teachers. The world in those days was a very exciting place. I was right at its center and a very important person. I still spent my holidays in Payagale, that small dull town. I remember that last long vacation in my final year at the university very well. Lokunanda was just the same, still full of Shraddha, still busy collecting the meritorious acts. But there was now about her an air of relaxation, the air of someone who could rest a bit after a hard life of meritorious toil and labor. Lokunanda knew that she was still a long way from Nibbana, and she was in no special hurry to get there. She had no objection to remaining in Sansara for a couple of eons or so, and she was determined to spend those eons as comfortably as possible. She had always been a very practical woman. A week before my vacation ended, we were all invited to a big Pirit and Dani at her home. Lokunanda's the Pirits and the Danis were always a great success. Everyone enjoyed themselves. For at least 2 days before, the house was full of people. Bustle, the talk, the laughter, the smell of food. There was the friendliness and the good humor everywhere. The Spirit and Dani was to be a really grand affair. 25 monks had been invited. Kusuma, who was the very artistic, was helping with the decoration of the Pirit Mandape. I watched her as she worked. She was at this time about 19, tall, slender, fair-skinned. Her hair was tied back in a big conde. Her face was fuller, rounder, but her eyes were as huge and as black as ever. She moved quickly, lightly, and then, all at once, I realized that Kusuma was a very beautiful woman. So I looked at her often. So did Lokunanda, but for very different reasons. During a Piridhane, there were a lot of young men around. Lokunanda took her responsibilities very seriously. Seeing that everyone behaved in the proper way was the most serious of those responsibilities. Kusuma, in the particular, was a special responsibility. Kusuma wasn't even in the least bit frivolous. Salpi was quite old now, and Kusuma was beginning to have an increasingly important place in Lokunanda's household. She valued that importance very much. She moved gracefully but efficiently from kitchen to veranda, supervising, organizing, advising. One young man in particular was very willing to obey her instructions and orders. He always managed to find work where she was likely to be. If Kusuma was in the kitchen, he was there too, eager to cut, chop, sift, or pound. If she was in the sitting room, now cleared for the Pirit Mandape, there he was eager to hammer in nails, paste the paper, move tables and chairs. Kusuma spoke to him very briskly, sometimes even severely. There was then never the slightest softness in her voice or face, but once I saw her look around as if searching for someone. She looked anxious. Then she spotted him among all the other young men and smiled, a quick, tiny smile. Lokunanda did not see that smile, but I did. I asked the Nangi who he was. There is Piyadasa. He works in Martin Mudalali's Kadi. I looked at him again. He was tall and fair-skinned and had a kind face. I liked him. On the night of the Pirit, the 25 monks arrived in all their yellow-robed splendor and took their places in the pure white Pirit Mandape. Its walls were made of the cut-work paper. Its the canopy, a dazzling white cloth. If the monks who were seated inside the mandape looked up, they would have seen that the canopy had little bunches of young coconut leaves hanging from it at intervals. They had been placed there by Kusuma. We sat around the mandape on mats and listened to the monks chanting Pirit. I looked around me and noticed the Piyadasa seated behind Kusuma. They were right at the back of the room. Lokunanda, who was the chief Dayaka and the donor of everything, sat by herself on a special little mat, forehead level. She was the picture of the perfect Shraddha, and we all admired her greatly. After the Mahapirita, I went off to bed. Lokunanda sat listening to the chanting all night. I was told this was nothing less than we expected. Yet she was the most energetic of us all the next morning. After the morning meal, the chief monk preached a short sermon. I still remember the sermon very well. It was on Dana Paramita, the perfection of giving. We had heard lots of Jataka stories on the perfection of giving before. The story of Vesantara, of Sri Sangabo, and of course the story of the little self-sacrificing hare whose the image Sakra placed high up in the bright moon for all to see. These stories we all knew, but not the story the chief monk told us that morning. This was the new to us. Pinvatuni, he began, of the 10 perfections, the one perfection is the better than another. All these 10 equal perfections that reside in the Tathagata. Brighter than 1,000 suns are the perfections of the Tathagata. Bearing in mind then that all the perfections of the Tathagata shine equal in their splendor, today I shall discourse on the perfection of giving. The perfection of giving shows itself in the one key way. It shows itself in the generosity, giving of alms in generosity. And those who seek the supreme goal must ceaselessly practice such generosity. Our Pinvat, Payagal Hamine, and all you others who have participated in this ceremony have shown your presence here. Yet hard is the way to enlightenment. Listen to this. Once the Bodhisattva was born a king. Manikuda by name. He was a compassionate, generous, a giver and donor of all things. Being so, Manikuda wished to perform the great sacrifice. Nirargada. Various the heretics, Brahmins, mendicants, beggars, princes gathered for the great sacrifice. The Bodhisattva Manikuda addressed the assembly. Says, I wish to perform the great sacrifice. Nirargada, at which no doors are closed, no living being killed, except with the mind full of a sympathy. These sacrifice gifts, and gifts were given to all those who came to suit their desires. Then, on the 20th day at sunrise, Sakra, the Lord of all the gods, wishing to test the Bodhisattva, took the form of a terrible demon and arose suddenly from the great sacrifice in the fire. He cried out, Fortunate and compassionate Lord, deliver me, who suffer severe pain, by a quick gift of food. Fear not, dear one. Here is as much food as you desire. It is not this kind of food I eat, great king, but the flesh and blood of the newly killed. The kind of food you eat, dear one, cannot be had without injury to others. I abstain from killing. Therefore, eat my flesh and drink my blood to your content. Today, giving away my flesh and blood, I shall place my foot on the head of Mara. Thus will I delight the whole world that yearns for liberation. As the Bodhisattva spoke, the whole earth trembled like a boat in the ocean. The gods, the Asuras, and the Gandharvas in the sky, hearing of that wonderful gift, were spellbound. Taking the knife, the Bodhisattva opened a vein in his brow. The demon drank, quenching his thirst. The Bodhisattva, filled with delight, next cut off his flesh and gave it to the demon to eat. And he thought, my wealth has been fruitful, my flesh, my blood, my life has been fruitful. As they read his thoughts, the gods assembled in the air cried out aloud with joy. Sakra assumed his own form, saying, Great king, I am Sakra. What do you wish to gain by this deed? By this the most strenuous effort. The Bodhisattva replied, Kausika, by this the gift I do not wish to be a Sakra, a Mara, or Brahma, or gain the sovereignty over the universe or the birth in the heavens. But by this the deed may I attain the perfect, the unconsoled, to liberate the unliberated. This is my wish. This Pinvatuni is Dana Paramita, the perfection of giving. The monk stopped. The sermon was over. For a moment we were all silent. Then people stirred, joints cracked, and Lokunanda, with a hand clasped high above her head, cried out in a voice trembling with Shraddha, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu. All who were there took up the cry. The monks bowed their heads and gazed steadfastly at their fans. After giving the people his blessing, the chief monk, followed by the others, left. Lokunanda, her face beaming, came up to Mother and Punchinanda. This is the most successful Pirit and Dane I've ever given. Everything went off beautifully. Did you notice how Mrs. Velikala was eyeing the Pirit Mandape? It is 10 times nicer than hers. Punchinanda laughed. She asked me who had made it and where we had got all that white paper from. I muttered something but didn't tell. Both Nandas laughed gleefully, almost like little girls. 2 days later, when I arrived home after a sea bath, I found Lokunanda, Punchinanda, Mother and Nangi all seated on the veranda talking. It seemed a very serious conversation. Lokunanda looked agitated, angry. Kusuma wants to marry Piyadasa. Nangi burst out when she saw me. Good idea. Lokunanda stared at me as if I had suddenly turned into a serpent. Kusuma to marry Piyadasa? She exploded. What is wrong with that? I really couldn't see what all the fuss was about. That is what I thought too, said Nangi boldly. Nangi had just got engaged to our second cousin, Nihar, and felt that everyone should be encouraged to marry as quickly as possible. We both looked at Lokunanda in spite of being a final year at the university. I felt a bit afraid. Lokunanda's chest heaved, her lips trembled, her eyes seemed to shoot sparks of fire. The selfishness, the ingratitude of everybody. After all I have done. Punchinanda said, You people, you young people, these days don't think of anything serious. Only your own selfish desires matter. Do you ever think of your duty? She spoke very severely. Tanha, Tanha, Tanha. They are all filled with Tanha. When I think of what I have done for that girl, she was like a wild animal when she came to me, covered with sores and lice. I cleaned her, fed her, clothed her, civilized her. Piyadasa came to me and said he wanted to marry her, said she was willing. I couldn't believe it, to do this thing behind my back. Lokunanda's chest began to heave again. I said, Now Lokunanda, don't be angry with me, but they haven't done anything behind your back. Piyadasa came and asked you, didn't he? They haven't run away or anything, as Freud says. Mahinder, what do you know about these things? After you went to that university, your head is stuffed full useless foreign ideas. Who is this Freud, huh? Who is this Marx you are now always trying to talk about? What do these the foreigners they know about our ancient Sinhala culture? I have given the Kusuma so much. I have been like a mother to her. Is it too much to ask for a little gratitude in return? It is her duty to stay with the Lokunanda. Lokunanda didn't bring her up for nothing, said mother. But she says the Piyadasa and she will live close to Lokunanda. She says she'll continue to work for Lokunanda, argued Nangi. I know what those the promises are worth, Lokunanda sounded very sour. Will Kusuma have to live with Lokunanda forever then? Asked Nangi. Why not? Snapped Punchinanda. Much better for her to stay with Lokunanda than going off with that Piyadasa and having 10 children. I am not selfish. I'll arrange a marriage for Kusuma to the right person at the right time, but she can't marry Piyadasa. Lokunanda was very firm about that. Arrange a marriage for her. No wonder she is so selfish. You have spoiled her thoroughly, Akka, said Punchi Nanda. I am going to ask the Martin Mudalali to send the Piyadasa away to his brother's shop in Gaul. I've done a lot for Martin Mudalali. That man has a lot of respect for me. What if Kusuma runs away? I asked. She will never do that, said Nangi. She is very loyal to Lokunanda. Loyal? Fine loyalty, snapped Lokunanda. Kusuma did not run away. She continued to live in Lokunanda's household exactly as before. After a few months, Lokunanda forgot all about the Piyadas incident. He eventually married a girl in Gaul and, as far as we know, never even visited Payagala again. Kusuma, of course, never married. I never heard Lokunanda talk about arranging a marriage for her again, but she gave over the running of the house entirely to Kusuma. This left her free to study the Abhidhamma. It was the Kusuma who arranged for the sale of all the garden produced like coconuts and yams. It was the Kusuma who bought all the necessities for the household. It was the Kusuma who organized all the Piritha ceremonies and the dhanis. She became almost as keen as the Lokunanda in the performance of such duties. They seemed to give her an ever increasing pleasure. She talked a lot about how the accumulation of merit would give a person a better life in the future. She often said that she must have been very wicked in a past life and was determined to be better in this her present one. Lokunanda was very pleased with her. Punchinanda began to be almost jealous. I was in the Payagala for a few weeks before leaving to study further at London University. Mahinder, said Punchinanda, I think Lokunanda gives the Kusuma too much to do in the house. That woman is the more the mistress of the house than the Lokunanda herself. You should listen to her talking. I don't like the way she talks to me. She is turned into a very bossy woman. But Lokunanda listens to everything she says and does everything the way she wants it done. I don't like it. It was true that Kusuma occupied a very special place in Lokunanda's household. It was true that she spoke to us all as if she were our equal. There was nothing menial about Kusuma. But I didn't see why she should be menial. And I told Punchinanda so. You understand nothing, Mahinde. In spite of all your book learning, said Punchinanda. She sounded a bit annoyed. But since this is what everybody at home had always been telling me for a long time, I took no notice. I just smiled as I now always did when they talked to me like that. It was 3 years before I returned again to Sri Lanka. When I went to Payagale, I went as usual to Lokunanda's. Lokunanda had streaks of grey in her hair. She stooped a little and 2 of her front teeth were missing. She wore glasses and spent a lot of time reading the sutras. It was only Kusuma who was really busy preparing the dhani for the monks in the temple, crocheting table mats, making new vegetable beds at the back. Salpi was dead. Kusuma was in the sole charge of Lokunanda's household now. Kusuma must be making a lot of money from the sale of her table mats and pillow lace. What does she do with it? I said in the course of conversation. She is saving it to buy a brass lamp for the temple. One of those big tall ones. She is a good girl, doesn't spend her money on clothes and powder like other young women. Her one aim in life is to do meritorious acts. Because she wants to be born a rich woman in her next life, I asked, smiling. What's wrong with that? We all want to better ourselves. I couldn't argue with that. Lokunanda had always been a very practical sort of woman. I went to England again for post-doctoral study 3 years later. When I returned for a visit after 2 years overseas, I found Lokunanda older, grey. She took me to the temple and showed me the magnificent brass lamp Kusuma had donated the year before. She herself had just bought half an acre of land adjoining the temple grounds. She planned to build a new Bana hall there when she had enough money. The vihare, the shrine room, and the wall around the temple were a dazzling white. Kusuma had paid for the whitewashing this time. Lokunanda had wanted to contribute something towards it, but Kusuma had refused very firmly. The merit from this act had to be hers and hers alone. She did not want to share it with anyone. It was a long time before I returned home again on another visit. Many things had happened during my absence. Lokunanda had had a stroke which paralyzed both her legs. She now used a wheelchair after Punchinanda's death of a heart attack. Mother had sold our house and gone to live with Nangi in Kandy. Nangi urged me to go and see Lokunanda, who still lived in Payagala. Kusuma looks after her very well. Lokunanda is so lucky to have her, but she is very lonely. I haven't been to Payagala for over a year. I am tied to the house with all these children. Yes, go, Mahinda, said mother. I went to see her last year when I was in Colombo. But you know now difficult traveling is these days. The trains are jam-packed, the buses are jam-packed, and I am too old to knock about now. Go, Mahinda, she will be so happy to see you. She is very fond of you. Lokunanda's house was still the same. The garden looked flourishing. The coconut trees were loaded with nuts, the mango trees with fruit. The orchids just beside the veranda were all blooming. Lokunanda was in her wheelchair on the veranda. She saw me, tried to speak but couldn't. Her face quivered. I went up to her and took her hand. She held it tightly. Her hair was completely white. The skin of her neck and arms hung down in loose folds. In the years I had been away, she had shrunk into an old woman. I thought I'd never see you again, Putta, she said at last. Her voice was all query. When did you return? About 3 weeks ago. Payagala is exactly the same. We talked for a bit. I gave her news of her mother and Nangi suddenly. I remembered the banner hall she had once talked about years before. Is it finished now? I asked. Yes, she said quietly. She looked down at her hands. I felt something wrong. Aren't you happy about it, Lokunanda? Yes, I am, Mahinda. It is a great consolation to me to have built the hall before I die. Kusuma is building a new shrine room. Kusuma building a shrine room? Kusuma? But where does she get the money from? I asked quite thunderstruck. She gets some money from the sale of her table mats and pillow lace. Then there is the coconut money. But Lokunanda, the coconuts belong to you. I asked her to use the money, said Lokunanda uncomfortably. We were silent, looked around. I could see into the sitting room from where I was. It seemed strangely bare. Something was missing. Suddenly it came to me. Lokunanda's antique ebony furniture. What has happened to your ebony furniture? Lokunanda looked even more uncomfortable. I asked Kusuma to sell it for the shrine room. But Lokunanda, that furniture, you loved that furniture. You said you would never sell it. In fact, she had always said that the furniture was for me because it had belonged to my grandfather. I wondered whether she remembered. I looked at her. She was twisting her hands nervously. Kusuma has been like a daughter to me. She does everything for me. Where is Kusuma? She's at the temple. She goes every day to see how the building is going on. Don't say anything. Don't scold her, mind. She is like my daughter. Her one desire in life is to build that shrine room. But at your expense. Did you really want to sell that furniture? Lokunanda began to weep. That furniture was my father's. I wanted you to have it. I had never seen Lokunanda weep before. Great rivers of tears streamed down her shrunken cheeks. I noticed she wasn't wearing her ruby earrings. I didn't need to ask what had happened to them. I suppose the old Lokunanda's jewelry would be gradually sold to pay for the shrine room and other meritorious acts. I don't want the furniture. I live in a tiny 2-roomed flat in London, the size of your sitting room. What could I do with the ebony furniture there? I don't want to cling to my possessions. But that ebony furniture was my father's. I didn't want to sell it. Never mind, Lokunanda. Building a shrine room is a very good thing, a very meritorious act. It seemed strange to be talking like that, but I couldn't really console Lokunanda, though she stopped weeping. It was almost lunchtime when Kusuma returned from the temple. She was not at all pleased to see me. I could see that. She was now a middle-aged woman, broad, strong, determined, hard. Lunch was served almost immediately. I wheeled Lokunanda's chair to the dining table. Lokunanda had loved good food in the old days. I looked at the rice, the pol sambal, and the bit of a dried fish on the table. Kusuma stared at me defiantly, as if daring me to criticize. I was silent. Lokunanda said, "If only I had known you were coming, Putta. I would somehow have got some sear fish and prawns for you. You used to like them so much. Now, I like the dried fish better than anything else," I said, giving her a bright, false smile. It was a very silent meal. I wondered whether I should tell the mother and Nangi about Lokunanda's situation. But what good would it do? It was impossible for Lokunanda to live in Kandy. There was no room for her in Nangi's house, and who would look after her? I just could not see Kusuma living in Nangi's household. As Kusuma was clearing away the dishes and plates, I said, "So Kusuma, I hear you are building a shrine room. It must be a very expensive business." Lokunanda looked at me pleadingly, tearfully. Kusuma glared at me. "I have found the money for it. It is a very meritorious deed. No one should interfere with such good things. When will it be completed?" "The building will be completed in about a month's time, but I need more money for the image and the wall paintings inside. My name will be inscribed outside because I am the donor. She said, smiling proudly for the first time. Would you like to donate something, Mahinda Mahatmya? She asked. I was surprised that Lokunanda looked at me appealingly. I pulled out my purse and gave her the 50 rupees. She took it eagerly and put the notes into her purse. I wheeled Lokunanda back to the veranda. Tell me about London, Putta. Is it a big city? England must be a very advanced country now. Who cooks for you? She laughed when I told her that I cooked for myself. 5 meals you must be cooking. No wonder you look so thin. So why don't you get yourself a wife? Then she can cook for you. I ignored these suggestions and got up saying I had to leave. Her face changed. Ane Putta, what is the hurry? Stay the night. I said I couldn't. I had to be in Colombo for a lecture at the university that evening, and I promised the mother to be in Kandy the next day. Lokunanda gave a little sigh. When shall I see you again, Putta? Next time you come, I will be dead. Don't talk like that. Next time I see you, you will be on your feet and running the house yourself. But neither of us believed in that extravagant lie even for a second. She tried to smile, then said, No, I'll die in this wheelchair. It is my karma, but I am very lucky to have Kusuma. She is like my own daughter. It is my karma, she repeated. I said goodbye. She clung to my hand and kissed it. Come and see me again before you leave, Putta. Thun sarane pihitai. And she said once again, it's my karma. A commonplace, almost a meaningless phrase mouthed by so many. And yet, as I looked back for one last wave, there seemed to be a truth in it, a truth reflected in that heavy, sullen woman standing in the doorway, and in the other, feebly waving a loose-skinned hand. That is the end of the short story, Action and Reaction by Chitra Fernando.